On the land and the sea, let's swing out to victory over here, over there, anywhere. We can take 'em 1, 2, 3 with a riff, a break, and a flare.
I hope I hope both Joe and Ed, who are joining us this morning, actually appreciate the fact that we actually know what guests are coming up and actually pick music to kind of welcome them to the show. Joe, do me one favor, by the way, since we're here. It's Joe Forte, right? Because I'm from New Orleans. Is it Forte or Forte?
Well, folks will say Fort, folks will say Forte. I accept both. I even have family members who go both ways.
I understand.
Joe
Forte is a digital humanities specialist at Virginia Tech University Libraries. Ed Gitre is an assistant professor of history and a project director of the American Soldier in World War II at Virginia Tech. They're both from Virginia Tech, guys, by the way, and Virginia Tech has a remarkable program. It's the virtual VE Day, and they're here to share it with us, to give us all the information about it here on Dave Nemo Weekends. Ed, we're going to start with you, because at the core of this is a connectivity between those who are the reason the project happened and those who made the project happen. Can you unpack the story of what this is all about?
Thank you so much for having me on this morning. I encountered these sources on microfilm reels about a decade ago. I was in the National Archives just outside of Washington, D.C. And when I started to read these, I was absolutely blown away. And what's at the source of this project are handwritten reflections on war and military service from soldiers who were being surveyed by the Army during the war. So these were written in real time, uncensored, and anonymous. And as I started to read these initially, I thought to myself, the public needs to have access to these. And what they were, 65,000 pages worth of handwritten reflections. Fast forward, I'm at Virginia Tech a number of years later, and I'm at a university that has the technology to make this project happen. And what we've done is we have engaged thousands of people across the country and even overseas who have helped to transcribe these documents to make them accessible to the public. And so at the end of this, we're creating a public website that anybody for free can go to and read about the soldiers' experience during World War II in a really unique way.
You know, Ed, we had on Friday, our guest actually wrote a book about Theodore Roosevelt and the Spanish-American War, and it was called The Crowded Hour. And one of the things that Roosevelt was able to do after that war was, much like Caesar, kind of give an accounting of the event and really kind of give name and place to a lot of the young men who served with him over in Cuba. The vast number of people who actually served in World War II, all those little tiny stories, no matter how many moments we have from a Ken Burns documentary or how many documentaries pop up or how many times HBO does a show, there are so many little tiny stories that are just lost in the sea of time, whether it's on the beaches of Normandy or over on the shores of Midway. They're just gone. And these 65,000 are a chance to get these kind of snapshots, these moments in time. And there's a real connective tissue that you talked about in the Hard Five, and you've talked about also on other kind of things, the idea of making a connection between those who transcribe and those who actually are the core of it. Can you talk about, even though so many of them were anonymous, in regards to their efforts for you guys, the kind of connective tissue there that has occurred and the kind of spirit that has moved it forward?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. A lot of what we have about the World War II experience of the individual soldier has been reconstructed from memory. So oral histories are amazing testimonies to their experience and documentation. But what's really special about these is that they were written in the moment. So whether in boot camp, not too far from the firing line, serving over in the Pacific. And the connection is that it's one thing to read a document that's been printed. It's another thing to have to slow down and to focus and try to read handwriting, which is, lots of students aren't taught to read cursive anymore in script. But they have been part of this project, the students here at Virginia Tech. And when they slow down and they try to decipher these words, they feel like they're getting to know them, these individuals, even if it's just a page long of commentary. So it's a combination of the uncensored material, the fact that it's written in real time, but also the fact that it's handwritten, and they feel like they're making this connection. And so I've had a number of people who have reached out to me and said, "Hey, I have a relative who served, and they're no longer living, and I feel like by contributing to this project, I'm helping to preserve this memory and also make a personal connection myself."
You know, it's interesting, too, because in the last couple of years, more young people have been getting the chance to get their driver's license early, and they're actually doing it, which is a significant change from last couple of decades. The same thing's happening with writing in script, is that a number of people are discovering that the kind of thoughtfulness and mindfulness that a person is forced into, either by reading it or actually doing it, is slowing the pace down, but also allowing them to absorb this stuff. Joe, I'm going to shift to you for a second here, which is really cool because what he's talking about is really, really cool. It's also incredibly crazy ambitious. So when somebody comes to you with the idea that we're going to transcribe all of this, how do you react to that, and how do you make that happen?
Well, I didn't really make that happen. Let me contextualize my role for a second and say that I manage a suite of rooms and do media production with Virginia Tech Publishing in the libraries there, and in that suite of rooms, we were hosting what we called transcribe-a-thons regularly, and the last one was meant to be on Victory in Europe Day, VE Day, which was what, May 8th? Am I getting that correct? We had the closure, so we had to shift into what are we going to do? We can't use the rooms, and the closure also inspired a rush of transcription because people could engage with these responses at home, and that's how a lot of them had been working anyway. But they're stuck at home, so they get their production amped up, and they were going to finish earlier than they thought. So the final transcribe-a-thon plan turned into more of a celebration of the completion of that phase of the project. And you can correct me, Dr. Gitre, if I'm mischaracterizing something, but so what we did was interview a lot of different folks who were associated with the project in different ways, and coming from the act of transcription and the connections you guys are talking about. My favorite of those conversations were with folks who did a lot of the transcribing. Right, we had these what did you call them, Ed? Super transcribers or something?
Yeah. Some of them had transcribed up to 10,000 pages themselves. And we have people, these are all transcribed in at least triplicate to get the best quality. So even though we have them in triplicate, people can still transcribe. We're doing another round to get the best quality. So there was a celebration on May 8th, but people are still transcribing. But yeah, we've had users who've transcribed thousands of pages.
It's kind of remarkable too,
handwriting.
Joe, one of the things that, no, don't be sorry. It's funny because you said, well, I didn't really make this happen, but that's the coordination I was talking about, that kind of final step to kind of really kind of put the seal on it. What's interesting is that these things can get so kind of, they can spiral into bigger and bigger situations, Ed. And the idea that you guys got ahead, that the investment of time and the enthusiasm for the project actually allowed you a completion date sooner than you anticipated, and the ability to then recatalog and get even more done must have been just deeply moving for you, Ed.
It was, for me, we set an initial goal of getting this all transcribed in a 2-year period, and that was going to overlap. We got a generous grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities to fund this project. So we set out to do that, and around January, February this year, I thought to myself, I think we can do this. It's still going to be ambitious to complete this. And what happened is when people started staying at home, there was an uptick. And for me, it was really moving and I think it was also really moving for people who were contributing, because as we saw the statistics go up for the number of cases of COVID and all the anxiety around that, I could go over to Zooniverse, which is the platform we're using, the crowdsourcing platform. And as I saw the transcriptions coming in, it illustrated to me what people can do when they come together around something positive and they feel like they're contributing and making connections. So it motivated me as a project director, that not only are these people contributing to something that I'm helping to build, but I myself felt empowered by these contributors. And that's really what we wanted to capture on VE Day, was what these contributors were doing, not just for history, not only for themselves, but also for something larger than any one individual.
One of the things that is interesting to me, among many things inside of this project, is the actual logistics of it. Because, we're talking to some degree about how we kind of put the button on this. It's interesting that it becomes a VE Day virtual celebration, and the idea that you actually do your own VE Day victory over electronics in regards to getting all of this done. But can you take us back, Ed, to the starting point, not so much of your inspiration, because you kind of covered that, the idea of those microfiche existing, but the idea, can you take us through this needs to happen and how one goes about planning for something of this scale to happen? And does that question make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. There were two sides to this. One was the funding, and the National Endowment for Humanities, the NEH, does lots of public programming and also makes major investments in preservation of sources and providing access. And one of the things that's been really nice about the program that I've been working with is that they have two phases. They have a startup grant that you can apply for, and then also an implementation phase grant. And we got a startup grant from the NEH, which allowed us to plan over a whole year period how we were going to make this happen. And we're now completing the first of 2 years of an implementation grant. So there was a year of planning. The second was in terms of technology and the platform. People have heard about crowdfunding. There's also what's known as citizen science projects, and it's very similar to what we're doing. In fact, Zooniverse, the platform that we're on, has over 1.9 million members, and it's really a leader in citizen science projects. And I knew about crowdsourcing at the beginning of the project. But when I saw what was happening on Zooniverse, and there were some other military history projects on the platform, it just clicked. Things fell together. It was like, here you've got a large membership, large user base. You've got a really easy to use platform. You've got already some interest generated around military history, and it just seemed right. And it's proven to have worked really effectively because it is so easy. So we have students who are on the platform, we have retirees, we have veterans, and it's worked.
Let me ask you this, and either one of you guys can answer this in regards to crowdsourcing. So you're doing a crowdsourcing project. How much did the crowdsourcing, along with helping you kind of put things together, also become a way of how much of the scope of the recruitment, of getting people involved, came directly from the crowdsourcing? And do you know the percentage numbers, I guess is what I'm asking, that, would it have been possible to pull together the numbers you did without the crowdsourcing element attached to it?
I would say absolutely not. I knew at the beginning that I needed to get 65,000 pages transcriber. That was the goal. And even though I was doing some kind of beta testing with my students, and I teach a lot of World War II students at Virginia Tech, even that I knew it would take me years. So the only way that we could do this project, to complete this project, was to engage directly with the public. And so we tried, we're really active on social media. We connected with some organizations. The National Archives, where these sources are located, they added us to their list, and we've collaborated with them on other crowdsourcing and their crowdsourcing platform. But so we're at at this point, I think we just topped over 6,000 contributors, and I can tell you now that without those volunteers, we would not be launching a year from now this website with all this material.
And that's interesting too, because the idea that, people have kind of, I don't know if you know this, today's topic, the entire show, all 4 hours of it are dedicated to kind of the idea of what technology provides for us, the things that we could do in the past, how much the technology has accelerated, how different it is to kind of put this together, even including, and this kind of goes back to you for a second, Joe, that it allows that 20 years ago, even with the internet, what has happened is that 20 years ago, even with the internet, it would have been very difficult to kind of get the final push you guys have had because of the COVID crisis. But because of the acceleration of technology, you're allowed to kind of improvise, adapt, and overcome and come up with solutions that normally you would not have been able to kind of have access to. Can you talk about the speed in which you guys kind of came up with the idea of that virtual sort of push towards the end and how fast you had to react, Joe?
Well, yeah, there was a period of a lot of reacting, right? Because we were all out of our offices and studios and in the home. And Ed and I had been talking about creating a podcast around the project, and we'd started work on using student actors at Virginia Tech to dramatize some of the transcriptions, and we would organize those thematically and then have scholars address the source material. And so we had some of those recordings done, but we hadn't gotten around to recording Ed in conversation with other scholars. And we ended up using some of what we recorded from those student actors to put together a little sort of mini movie on the theme of race in the military and race in American society at the time. So that was sort of like an adaptation within the adaptation that led us to say, well, instead of a transcribe-a-thon, we'll have a series of interviews that we present over the period of the day. So it involved creating that little movie and sort of adapting stuff we were using for a previous project into what we were now faced with, given the stay-at-home orders, and then bringing all the interviews together. And for me, that experience. I'm not, Ed's the leader of the project, and he's deeply embedded in it, and I was just sort of peripherally assisting with some production and consultation. And I got a chance to talk to a lot, because I conducted a lot of the interviews that we ended up presenting on VE Day and recorded them. And I got a chance to talk to a lot of different people from a lot of different areas of the project. And it really sort of brought it contextualized it for me, brought the weight and the importance and the impact of the project home to me. And as I was saying before, especially engaging with the folks who did the transcribing, because you got to see their motivations, which are sometimes related to the project and in terms of an interest in World War II and this, and sometimes it had to do with stuff that was going on with them personally, whether it was sort of like a kind of social context for them, or a way to deal with a disability. There were really interesting stories, and it was touching to hear the way they were touched by what they read. And that's the other side of the crowdsourcing, right? There's the logistical facilitation of the process, the work of the project, but there's also the way in which it gets an incredible primary source knowledge base in front of the public, right? People in popular presentations of history, sources are mentioned, but they usually go over folks' heads. There's nothing quite as like the power and the impact of being directly engaging sources like this, and to hear the reaction of the folks as they talked about what they encountered in the soldiers' words. That's the other side of the crowdsourcing, not just bringing the people to the work, but bringing the sources to the people in a way that hadn't really happened a lot.
Yeah, and
outside a model like this.
It is really kind of cool, Ed, and it's a great point that Joe makes, the idea that it's bringing the folks to the folks, and that on many occasions you would actually, from all walks of life, but you could actually have a situation where a young man or a young woman the same age as one of the people who had written those letters so long ago is in fact coming face to face in real time, in analog time, with the words of someone who went through those experiences and crafted one of those letters. The kind of follow-up question of what Joe kind of opened up, I want to hear from you about this, is at any point do you then kind of realize that what started as this microfiche has become a virtual version of a great logistical undertaking where the scope is almost overwhelming and almost forces you back into individual cases because it seems so big on a virtual level that it's almost impossible to conceive of?
Yeah, that's a good point. I was going back and forth, particularly in the spring as we were planning for VE Day, thinking about the immensity of the task. And we talk about citizen archivists, citizen scientists, but the term that was used during World War II for so many soldiers and with part of the parlance was the citizen soldier. And I think it was actually in one of the interviews where that point was driven home, where someone not myself, made that very explicit connection. We're talking about citizen historians, but also, they're working with sources that are from citizen soldiers. And so that the connection was individual, but it was through the civic participation. The larger logistical perspective, definitely. I mean, there were so many times, particularly in the spring when things were shutting down, where I just kind of went into problem-solving modes, and I guess I've been imbibed the spirit of the George C. Marshalls and the leaders during World War II, and by no means am I close to a George C. Marshall, but they were faced with logistical problems all the time, and they couldn't complain to somebody else. They had to figure things out. And I think that, that just inspired me working with these sources under these conditions to think, if they could do it back then with what we have now today with technology, surely I can tackle this. And we did it thanks to the contributions of so many people.
I actually wanted to also give you guys a moment of praise in terms of creativity. The idea of having young students, young people between the ages of 18 and 21 reading these letters aloud, because, the great joke that Stephen Ambrose made at the end of Saving Private Ryan was he got everything right except all those guys are way too old for the most part. And the kind of inspiration to kind of use these young voices to kind of bring these things to life. Is that something moving down the road you guys are going to continue to kind of pursue and maybe breathe into the larger project? Either one of you can answer that.
Yeah.
We haven't really discussed it.
Yeah. So there are two things. One is that we are going to have curriculum on the website, and we are going to continue to engage teachers in the hope that they will engage their students. One of the members of the advisory board has been pushing me to do another phase, which is that at the end of World War II, there was a large oral history project, and the Army collected all these oral histories, but they're on microfiche. And so he thought that, this should be the next project that you do. So I told him at the time, well, let's finish this one first and then move on to the second one. But I definitely want to continue to have students engage, because for me, Virginia Tech has one of two senior military colleges embedded or part of a state university. And so we have lots of ROTC students who are going to go on and become officers. And I think one of the things that really moved me the most was to have those future officers sitting in my classroom, making these really direct connections with these World War II soldiers, and not just in terms of their common gripes about food, but also the sense of humor, really personal connections, and knowing that they're going to go on and might serve overseas, and to have them to see that that greatest generation wasn't so different in so many ways from who they are and what their generation is capable of.
That's really important too. A lot of people don't understand that. My dad, who is a veteran, and his brother, who were veterans, often say, "Don't judge the young people too hardly." He said those guys had their hand forced and rose to the occasion. We haven't seen what the people nowadays can do if the situation comes up. Joe Forte, Ed Gitre, it is so good to have you on the show. You are welcome back anytime, and we'd like to have you back so that we can get that website and all that information where people can go. Okay?
Sounds great. Thank you so much for the opportunity,
Thanks.
Dave.
It's been a pleasure.
You got it, man. Guys, we'll be right back with more of your phone calls before our next couple of guests arrive. It is the Dave Nemo Weekends.